The courthouse breathed like a sleeping animal as dawn thinned the fog. Daniel, 36, steadied his tie and stared at the brass doors. Lena, 34, watched from the steps with a cool smile. Daniel said, "They think I left them." Lena said, "You did." A bailiff cleared his throat, and the sound cracked the air. "Mr. Hale, 45, murmured Strategy, while flipping notes with dry precision. Daniel remembered the text that turned his son's eyes hard. Lena said, "Tell the judge you prefer freedom to fatherhood." Daniel said, "I prefer the truth." He gripped a folder, labeled pickups, messages, and receipts. The word abandonment glowed like a wound in his mind. A clock ticked above the seal, merciless and neat. Daniel breathed once, slow, as if pulling hope through a straw, and stepped toward the day that would name him or save him. The night before, Daniel rehearsed answers in a studio apartment that still smelled of fresh paint and quiet dread. Mr. Hale said, "Keep to facts and schedules." Daniel said, "Facts are all I have." A kettle clicked and no one poured the water. He studied a drawing of a sun that Noah, 8, once taped to their fridge. Daniel said, "I never missed a pickup." The room replied with humming pipes and city sirens. Lena's message looped in his mind like a broken chorus. Daniel said, "Sarah is 6, and she knows my knock." He gathered screenshots, emails, and calendar logs until the desk was a mosaic of days. He feared conflict and wore silence like armor. Yet love, stubborn and ordinary, made him brave. Morning traffic braided around the courthouse as parents from school pretended not to stare. A whisper moved like a draft under a door. Mr. Hale said, "They will lean on the word abandoned." Daniel said, "I called every night." He recalled Leah's silence and Sarah's soft, careful breaths. Lena said, "They cried because of you." Daniel said, "They cried because they were told to." He presented timestamps like oars against a current. A security guard scanned his folder with bored precision. The scanner chirped a sterile blessing. Daniel stepped through, lighter by paper yet heavy with promise. In the courtroom, wood panels smelled of polish and old arguments. The judge, 60, watched with rain-colored eyes. Opposing counsel said he disappeared for weeks. Mr. Hale said exhibits will refute that. Daniel said, "I was at the gate every Friday." Lena's chin lifted as if victory had a taste. The clerk stacked files like bricks for a future wall. Daniel's heart beat the tempo of a metronome. He pictured Noah's laces double-knotted by the school door. He pictured Sarah's backpack, small and brave. The bailiff said, "All rise," and the room obeyed. As opening statements sharpened, a knock at the rear door clipped the air. Mr. Hale said, "Expected?" Daniel said, "No, but I hope so." The judge glanced up, mildly curious. The bailiff opened, and a woman with steady posture and a canvas tote stepped in. Daniel recognized the school badge before the face. Miss Carter, 42, carried a folder like a lantern. Lena's eyes narrowed to a thread. Miss Carter said, "I was asked to wait." Mr. Hale said, "Your Honor, a witness relevant to pickups and calls." The clock clicked to a new minute. Daniel sat very still, as if stillness could hold the world steady. The judge adjusted his glasses, and the room settled into a brittle hush. Opposing counsel said, "This witness lacks foundation." Mr. Hale said, "Miss Carter can authenticate attendance logs." Miss Carter nodded, measured and calm. Daniel felt the edge of the bench like a rail under a storm. Lena said, "This is theater." The judge said, "I will hear her." Miss Carter said, "I am the homeroom teacher for Noah and the dismissal coordinator on Fridays." A printer chirped somewhere, tiny and relentless. Daniel said, "Thank you for coming." Miss Carter said, "The children deserve clarity." Clerk swore her in, and each word struck like a rung on a ladder. Opposing counsel clicked a pen and smiled without warmth. Mr. Hale said, "Please describe Friday pickups for the last school year." Lena folded her hands as if caging a bird. The clock crept forward, unblinking, and the story began to breathe. Miss Carter opened her folder, revealing sign-out sheets crisp as snow. She said, "These show Daniel collected Noah most Fridays and alternate Wednesdays." Opposing counsel said, "You cannot verify phone contact." Miss Carter said, "I can verify waiting." She described Daniel, under the awning on wet days, holding a spare umbrella. Daniel said, "Noah hates wet socks." A few parents in the gallery stared at their shoes. Miss Carter said, "Sarah waved from kindergarten when she saw him in line." Mr. Hale said, "Direct your attention to March." She traced a column with an even finger. She said, "No unexcused absences caused by missed pickups." Lena's jaw tightened, then relaxed by will. The judge watched as if reading weather maps. A thin light slid across the table and still. Cross-examination came like rain on tin. Opposing counsel said, "Is it not true he arrived late several times?" Miss Carter said, "He arrived before dismissal bell in all but 2 instances." Opposing counsel said, "And those 2? She said, "Traffic alerts documented citywide delays." He said, "You are sympathetic to him." She said, "I am sympathetic to accurate records." The gallery exhaled a nervous smile. Daniel said, "I logged the delays in the school app." Mr. Hale held up screenshots like small, firm shields. Unmuted. The judge said, "Counsel, stick to facts." Opposing counsel capped his pen with a click that sounded like a door. The silence after carried weight and shape. Mr. Hale advanced to communications. He said, "Miss Carter, did the school mediate phone contact?" She said, "Yes, when caller ID blocks prevented direct calls." Lena stared at the table as if reading a crack. Opposing counsel said speculation. The judge said, "Overruled, if based on logs." Miss Carter said, "On 4 dates, Daniel called the office and I patched him into the classroom phone for Noah." Daniel said, "He asked about a spelling test." Miss Carter said, "He also asked if Sarah's cough improved." The clerk projected call times with neat blue bars. Mr. Hale said, "Were any calls refused?" She said, "Once, when dismissal had already started." The room counted seconds that no one could reclaim. The judge leaned forward, voice low and steady. He said, "What is your observation of the children when their father arrives?" Miss Carter said, "Noah's shoulders drop and he asks about science club." She said, "Sarah runs until she remembers to walk." Opposing counsel said, "Objection, emotional coloring." The judge said, "Overruled for limited purpose of context." Daniel felt the words land like soft rain on dry soil. Lena said, "They fear his inconsistency." Miss Carter said, "They fear adult conflict at the curb." Mr. Hale, "Let the silence underline the line." The bailiff shifted boots on tile, a steady percussion. The judge said, "Proceed to exhibits regarding Friday routines." The clock murmured a new minute, and everyone heard it. The judge said, "Continue." Mr. Hale said, "Miss Carter described Noah's demeanor during exchanges." Miss Carter said, "When Daniel arrived, Noah ate, relaxed, and asked about robotics." She added, "When plans changed last minute, he scanned the curb for both parents." Opposing counsel said, "Irrelevant emotion." The judge said, "Overruled for context." Ms. Carter said Sarah, 6, often waved at Daniel and then checked Lena's face before smiling. Daniel watched the transcript keys dance like rain. Lena said, "I manage their schedules alone." Mr. Hale said, "Do these sign-out sheets show shared responsibility?" She said, "Yes, with consistency." The gallery shifted, a shoal of whispers. The judge's pen tapped once, measuring the distance between claim and record, and everyone waited for the next ledge of truth. Mr. Hale said, "Your Honor, defense moves to admit co-parenting app logs." The clerk projected timestamps like constellations. Opposing counsel said, "Hearsay." Mr. Hale said, "Business records with geotags." The judge said, "Admitted." Daniel said, These are my pickups and check-ins. The monitor traced a year of Fridays in blue. Mr. Hale said, "Note, March 12th, April 9th, May 21st study." He added, "Location pings at school gate within 5 minutes of dismissal." Opposing counsel said he could ping and leave. Mr. Hale said Cross will show sign-outs within minutes. The judge said, "Proceed." Lena's expression held, polished and still, like a lid on boiling water. Daniel felt the room lean toward proof, and his breath evened. Opposing counsel said, "The app reflects only what he inputs." Mr. Hale said, "Cross-reference with school scans." The clerk overlaid sign-out times, like heartbeat lines. Ms. Carter said, "These align with dismissal." Opposing counsel said, "Two gaps exist." Mr. Hale said, "Citywide delays documented." Daniel said, "I called the office both days." The judge said, "Record notes confirm rerouted traffic." Lena said, "His pattern is chaos." Ms. Carter said, "The pattern is persistence." The courtroom quiet shifted from doubt to arithmetic. Mr. Hale said, "No missed pickups resulting in unexcused absences." The judge nodded once, a small lighthouse in methodical fog. During recess, the hallway filled with shoe squeaks and soft thunder from vents. Daniel said, "Thank you for coming, Ms. Carter." She said, "The children need adults to be plain." Lena stood near a pillar, phone low, eyes higher. Mr. Hale said, "We return in 10. Ms. Carter said, "Noah asked last week if loyalty means choosing a side." Daniel said, "It means showing up." She said, "He notices you do." The bailiff, 50, watched the clock like a conductor. Lena said, "You rehearse halos out here." Daniel said, "I rehearse facts." The second hand kissed the 12, and the door magnets hummed. Everyone gathered their edges and moved toward the next measure. Back inside, Mr. Hale said, "Let us address communications through intermediaries." He added, "Were messages relayed by the office when caller ID blocks occurred?" Ms. Carter said, "Yes, 4 times." Opposing counsel said, "Irregular channels confuse children." Mr. Hale said, "Irregular blocks create them." The judge said, "Counsel, confined to evidence." The clerk displayed a note from the office log. Ms. Carter said, "Daniel asked if Sarah 6 needed her inhaler." Daniel said, "She did, and I brought it." The record showed arrival time, crisp and indifferent. The judge wrote a line, then another, and the tension settled like dust that refuses to rise. The judge said, "Resume." "Mr. Hale," said Miss Carter, "describe the spring conference for Noah." Miss Carter said, "Noah, 8, presented a poster on circuits, then froze when family questions began." She added, "He whispered that his mother said his father abandoned them." Opposing counsel said, "Objection, hearsay." The judge said, "Admitted as state of mind." Ms. Carter said, "I asked who told him that." She said, "He answered, Lena." Daniel tightened his hands so the tremor had nowhere to go. Lena looked at a knot in the wood as if it were a horizon. Mr. Hale said, "What did you do next?" Miss Carter said, "I noted the statement and informed the counselor per policy." The gallery shifted like a page turned by air. The judge's pen hovered over the pad, then wrote in slow strokes that felt heavier than ink. Mr. Hale said, "Please identify this email." Ms. Carter said, "My message to the principal and counselor, time-stamped after the conference." She added, "Subject line reads, student anxiety regarding parental absence claims." Opposing counsel said, "You editorialized." She said, "I reported student words and effect." The clerk displayed the thread with dates stitched like rails. Daniel said, "I called that night." Lena said, "You called to defend yourself." Mr. Hale said, "The record shows he asked about homework topics." The judge said, "Counsel will let the exhibit speak." Miss Carter said, "Noah asked if loyalty means choosing the parent who stays." She said, "I told him loyalty can be shared when adults keep promises." A thin silence held, precise as a ruler. Mr. Hale said, "Call the school counselor." Miss Rivera, 39, stepped to the stand with a folder built like a map. She said, "I met Noah, 8, and Sarah, 6, after the conference." She added both expressed fear that their father had left forever. Opposing counsel said, prompted by leading questions? She said, "No, prompted by the claim attributed to their mother." The judge said, "Proceed carefully." Mr. Hale said, "What did you observe when Daniel arrived for dismissal that week?" She said, "Noah's posture released." Sarah smiled after checking Lena's face. Daniel looked at the seal above the bench and willed it not to sway. The notes rustled like small weather. Opposing counsel said, "Parents vent in private groups." Mr. Hale said, "Exhibit D, PTA, thread." The clerk enlarged a message where Lena wrote, "I told them he left us, so they stop asking about weekends." Lena said, "It was sarcasm." Mr. Hale said, "Context shows logistics instructions followed." The judge said, "The court will take the text at face value unless clarified by evidence." Daniel said, "They asked why Friday changed." Ms. Rivera said, "Children adopt adult phrases to anchor fear." Opposing counsel said, "Inflammatory." The judge said, "Noted, continue." The gallery's breath thinned, and the carpet seemed to absorb it. The judge said, "Miss Carter, one final question." He added, "Did you ever correct the statement with the children?" Miss Carter said, "Yes, gently and factually." She said, "I told Noah and Sarah their father stood at the gate most Fridays and called when delayed." Daniel felt a hinge ease inside his chest. Lena's eyes flicked toward the door, then steadied. Opposing counsel said, "Teachers should avoid family narratives." Miss Carter said, "Teachers uphold facts that reduce harm." Mr. Hale said, "No further questions." The judge wrote a note that sounded like a verdict, learning to speak. The bailiff's boots marked time as the room exhaled. Daniel placed his palm on the Bible, and the oath felt like a bridge over fog. Mr. Hale said, "State your routine." Daniel said, "Fridays at 2:45 I park by the north gate, wait by the awning text at arrival." He added, "Noah, 8, likes robotics club, so we delay pick up 10 minutes." Mr. Hale said, "Evidence." Daniel said, "App logs, photos, gas receipts, school, emails." He described Sarah, 6, counting steps from the door to the curb. He said, "She stops at 8, then walks." The judge watched, neither kind nor cold, only exact. Daniel said, "I moved to a studio 3 miles from school to keep the route simple." He added, "I never told them a lie about us." The room held steady, as if balance could be taught by careful nouns. Mr. Hale said, "Did you abandon your children?" Daniel said, "No, I kept showing up when it was hardest." Opposing counsel rose like a blade tested on cloth. He said, "You left the family home, correct?" Daniel said, "We agreed on space during arguments." He said, "Space looks like absence to children." Daniel said, "Presence looks like Fridays at the gate." He said, "You changed numbers." Daniel said, "My number remained, hers blocked mine sometimes." He said, "Proof?" Mr. Hale said, "Carrier records in Exhibit F call." The clerk displayed call attempts hitting voicemail after 1 ring. Daniel said, "When blocks occurred, I called the office." He added, "I asked for Noah and Sarah through the school line." Opposing counsel smiled without warmth and said, "You want to look diligent." Daniel said, "I want my kids to feel safe." The judge's pen paused, then wrote one slow line. Mr. Hale said, "Call Mr. Owens." A security supervisor, 52, took the stand with keys that chimed like a rule. He said, "Cameras cover the North Gate weekdays." Mr. Hale said, "Authenticate these clips." He said, "Recorded Fridays, 2:40 to 3. The screen showed Daniel under the awning, weeks accumulating like proof. Opposing counsel said, "Angles can deceive." Mr. Owens said timecodes do not. The judge leaned forward as March storms blurred the frame and left a man still waiting. Daniel stared at his smaller self and did not blink. Mr. Hale said, "Do timestamps align with sign-out logs?" Mr. Owens said, "Within minutes." The room translated pixels into ordinary devotion. Lena stepped to the stand, chin lifted as if carrying crystal. Mr. Hale said, "Did you write that PTA message?" Lena, 34, said, "Yes." He said, "Did you tell Noah and Sarah their father abandoned them?" She said, "I used a shorthand to stop questions." He said, "Children heard a verdict." She said, "I was tired of explaining schedules alone." He said, "Alone contradicts shared logs." The judge said, "Answer narrowly." Lena said, "I said words I regret." Daniel looked at the seal and tried not to look at her. Mr. Hale said, "Do you understand their fear followed that claim?" She said, "I see it now." The gallery folded itself into quiet. Redirect arrived soft but precise. "Mr. Hale," said Daniel, "one question." He said, "What do you want this court to order?" Daniel said, "A plan that keeps the truth near the children." He added, "Shared time, steady routines, no language that says anyone left them." The judge's gaze weighed the request like a scale that remembers grain. Miss Rivera nodded slightly, a counselor's blessing in miniature. Lena's shoulders lowered, a fraction, as if a door had opened to air. Daniel said, "I will keep showing up." He added, "I will not answer cruelty with cruelty." The bailiff shifted, and the room seemed to settle around the possible shape of peace. The clock moved, and no one minded. The judge said, "We will hear closings." Opposing counsel rose and drew a circle of words around doubt. He said, "He left the home and left confusion." Mr. Hale said, "He left a house, not his children." He added, "Logs, calls, and witnesses align." Opposing counsel said, "Children felt abandoned." Mr. Hale said, "They felt a statement, not a fact." Daniel kept his hands flat, as if steadying a map. Lena watched the table and blinked once, slow as truce. The judge said, "Address the impact of language." Mr. Hale said, "Words either wound or build a bridge." The room narrowed to the bench, and the air waited for an answer that could hold. The judge said, "I have questions." He added, "What safeguards prevent mixed messages?" Ms. Rivera said, "A script for transitions and a shared calendar." She said, "No labels of abandonment or blame." Mr. Hale said, "Agreed." Opposing counsel said, "We request supervision for 3 months." The judge said, "I see no basis for supervision." He added, "I see a basis for structure." Daniel said, "Structure helps them breathe." Lena said, "Structure helps me plan." The clerk prepared a form like a clean road. The bailiff shifted, and the room breathed with him. The judge delivered the order in careful bricks. He said, "Shared physical custody per alternating weeks with Friday handoffs at the school gate." He said, "Daily check-in call at 7:30, unless activity conflicts." He said, "No statements implying abandonment." He added, "Use the co-parenting app for changes and confirmations." He said, "Each parent may attend school events without commentary." Daniel said, "Yes, Your Honor." Lena said, "Yes." The clerk nodded as she typed, a quiet metronome for new days. The judge said, "This court expects the truth to be near the children." The room heard the sentence and held it like water. In the corridor, words shed their armor. Miss Rivera said, "Use the script at exchanges." She handed a card like a small compass. Daniel said, "I will follow it." Lena said, "So will I." Mr. Hale said, "Keep records, not recriminations." Miss Carter, arriving with her tote, said, "I can brief the office." Daniel said, "Thank you for protecting the curb." Lena said, "I should not have said he left." She added, "I was angry and tired." Daniel said, "I was scared and stubborn." The second hand touched the 12, and doors unlocked a path forward. That evening, rain paused, and the city smelled like clean slate. Daniel stood by the school gate at 7:25, early by habit and hope. He said, "I will follow the order like a promise." The phone buzzed at 7:30. Lena said, "Noah finished math, and Sarah chose the blue pajamas." Daniel said, "Tell them I love them, and I will call in the morning." Lena said, "Good night." The line clicked, gentle as a light switched off. Daniel watched the awning, empty but faithful. Tomorrow would test them. The plan would hold if they held it. The first Friday under the order came with a crisp sky and air that carried pencils and pavement dust. Daniel stood at the north gate, folder in hand. Noah, 8, spotted him first and broke into a grin. Sarah, 6, walked fast until the 8th step, then slowed, exactly as she always did. Daniel said, "Hey, explorers." Noah said, "We made a volcano in science." Sarah said, "I wore the blue pajamas last night." Lena, 34, lingered at the curb, a small wave ready but restrained. Daniel said, "I'll have them back Sunday at 5. Lena said, "I'll bring the math workbook." The exchange was short, but the space between them felt less like a battlefield and more like a bridge. The bell inside rang, and the gate closed with a sound that was just a sound. At home, Daniel set Sarah's backpack by the couch and Noah's lunchbox on the counter. He said, "Homework first, then bike ride." Noah said, "Deal." Sarah said, "Can we bake too?" Daniel said, "We can if we clean up after." The kitchen filled with the smell of warm bread and sharpened pencils. The co-parenting app chimed with a note from Lena. "Soccer game Sunday morning." Daniel typed back, "We'll be there." Noah tested his spelling words aloud, voice steady. Sarah counted the sprinkles for cookies. Daniel felt the house hum, not loud, but steady like a current under safe ground. He thought about the gate, the calendar, the bridge in their words. Sunday arrived with soccer cleats and thermos steam. Daniel stood at the sideline, scarf around his neck, while Lena arrived from the opposite side. Sarah waved between plays, hair pulled into a bouncing ponytail. Noah jogged past and said, "We're winning." Lena said, "Thanks for bringing snacks." Daniel said, "Thanks for sending the shin guards." Their voices stayed low, as if protecting the quiet. Ms. Carter, passing with her tote, said, "Good to see both of you here." Lena said, "We're trying." Daniel said, "It's better when they see us both." The whistle blew, and the team swarmed the field in laughter. For a moment, the field was just a field. The Friday after, rain slicked the awning, and Daniel stood with 2 umbrellas. Lena approached, coat zipped to the chin. She said, "They've been asking less about last year." Daniel said, "Maybe they feel steadier." She said, "Maybe we do too." The children emerged with matching rain boots, Noah holding a science project under plastic, Sarah clutching a library book. Daniel said, "Careful with the volcano." Lena said, "Careful with the ending." Their eyes met, not with agreement, but with an understanding that needed no court order. The rain softened, as if listening. Months later, spring pressed green into the schoolyard. Daniel arrived early, leaning on the fence as wind lifted the scent of cut grass. Noah and Sarah ran out together, no pause at the 8th step. Sarah said, "We finished our garden box." Noah said, "We planted tomatoes." Daniel said, "Then I guess we'll need pasta nights." Lena walked up, sunglasses hiding her eyes, but her voice soft. She said, "They're excited to show you." Daniel said, "I'm excited to see it." The gate stayed open a little longer, as if learning not to close too soon. The day felt ordinary, and that was the gift.